Welcome to the Beyond the Mortgage podcast, where we go beyond the numbers and delve deep into the aspects of money, mindset, and growth. This podcast is dedicated towards helping you navigate not only the world of mortgages, but transform your relationship with money and achieve financial freedom. I'm excited today because one of my dear friends is here to talk about all things money. Colette Fortin, who is the senior mediator with Fairway Divorce, changing the way divorce happens. You've been there for 15 years. And Colette, thank you so much and welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Tracy. It's good to be here.
I'm excited again because you and I time and time again talk about money, and we really talk about where people are at with their mindset, what we've seen with relationships with people in the past, and what currently we're dealing with today's economic environment. But I want to talk really right now and set the stage about you. So let's talk a bit about your past, how it got you to Fairway Divorce, and your passion with helping people through mediation.
Well, ironically, I was actually a teacher for 20 years, and having gone through my own separation and divorce, and also seeing so many kids navigating mom and dad's divorce, and the devastation, I think, the financial and emotional devastation of the traditional system, whereby both parties are going to retain separate lawyers and negotiate their separation, often involving long, costly court battles. And I saw the devastation it had on kids, and I knew that there had to be a better way to help people navigate that difficult time. And so I joined Fairway Divorce in 2010, and we have helped close to 1,000 families navigate those difficult conversations to preserve the wealth that they've built together and to help them with a new plan going forward.
Isn't it amazing when I talk to people time and time again, how they get into what they do and their purpose is usually going through it themselves. Yeah. And I know, Colette, you and I had met many years ago, and I saw the incredible work that you do with people and really help them through a very stressful time. Like going through divorce is I think it's one of the top 3 stresses that you have in life. Yeah. So let's talk about wealth. Like when I talk about wealth with you, I really want to look at what defined wealth for you at a younger part of you starting in this career to where you're at today with all the people that you've served and supported.
Well, interestingly, the old adage of money doesn't bring happiness, and sometimes people think that money is what causes separations, and while that may be one of the elements, I think what I have come to know over the years is I like to use the word prosperity, and that prosperity and wealth is more than just what you have in your bank account or how big your house is. It's about the health in your relationships with your significant other or family. It's your career, it's your own wellness. And so for me, the word wealth is about this broader scope of elements within your life.
And it's amazing you said that because I always talk about that, and it's not the money, it's about that holistic family and personal wellness, financial wellness, right? And wellness is also your mindset, right? And where that's at. So I want to dive into that mindset because I think that we know when we're dealing with people that are going through struggles, and especially if they're separating, are you finding there's a commonality with individuals or maybe one partner to the other in terms of their mindset on wealth and what that is defined for them or that relationship?
Well, certainly when there are financial difficulties or pressures, there's often a misalignment in how people see money. And one person may be more of a saver and one person may be a spender. But I think the common thread is being able to talk about it.
Yeah.
People don't have these conversations within the context of their relationship. They bring their past experiences and values around money to the marriage or the relationship without really evaluating, well, what is going to be our approach to this? And because no one teaches us how to communicate when times are difficult, we go through a relationship, the honeymoon phase is over, there's a crisis, and let's face it, I know we're all sick of talking about COVID and the impact, but that was in effect a huge impact on people. And suddenly now we're facing unemployment, we're facing difficulty managing our budget, living in the same house together 24/7. We don't know how to talk about it. And so failed marriages are about expectations that aren't met. but also because we haven't really talked about what that's going to look like. And if we're not on the same page, how do we find common ground so that we can move forward?
It's amazing you say that, because I think that, we don't want to talk about COVID anymore, but the reality of how much stress that has put on people and the trauma and significance that's impacting us in every aspect of our lives because of going through COVID. I mean, let's face it, we go through a pandemic every 40 years. And this is going to impact, I think, us as going forward. So when you're talking to individuals that are going through separations, and we're talking about this lack of communication, do you find that this has been a generational healing in terms of the aspect of that communication? What I mean by that is, we talked about previously before the podcast about how the educational system is bringing more financial literacy, being able to help people, young people, understand budgeting and being able to, work on being their best version of themselves with finances. Are you finding that you're seeing that in certain age groups, that it's more significant that there's a lack of communication when there is a marital breakdown? Or are you finding that we're still struggling with, it doesn't matter what age that people are at, if there's a lack of communication, it's still there in this environment?
Yeah, absolutely. A universal issue is around not being able to talk about it. And we will compartmentalize our lives in a relationship because life is really busy. So one person is registering the kids for activities, one's doing the lawn care, one's doing the budgeting, or if you don't have a budget, managing the finances. And Tracy, I cannot tell you how many times as we're going through the financial analysis of their net worth and talking about the division of assets and sadly debt, how many times people say, Colette, I had no idea. My partner took care of the finances. I had no idea we had a line of credit that was this high, or that so-and-so had 3 credit cards. I just didn't know.
I have to pause on that because I find that over the years, I found that with couples as well too. The lack of communication. And I listened to Grant Cardone talk about wealth, and he talks about it with his family, and how he says, like, every Sunday he sits down with his family. It's just part of what they do. If they go to church in the morning and they do an activity outside, then they spend the evening and they talk about money, what that is, where they're at as a family, what needs to be done to help educate their children. And I found that I had to pause on that because when I reflect, I mean, I didn't grow up in that environment where my parents sat down every Sunday.
No, me
and they
neither.
came from the financial background. And I know how hard my parents work, but no one taught them to teach us as young children to sit down and talk about money. And I think we're all coming from the systematic, societal, not just conversation, but just the way life is that money is just as unknown and silent conversation, and we're just supposed to know how to be successful and supposed to know where to navigate and be able to be disciplined or where to put our money. And a lot of us have no idea. And the problem is that we get judged on it.
Yeah.
So going back to what you were saying there, where one partner is saying, I had no idea the line of credit was this high. Are you finding that judgment being escalated in those situations when you're dealing with that marital breakdown? Like, how do you deal with that with clients?
Well, and the shame that comes with not knowing, right? And this happens to good people. And,
it does.
And because, as you said, there wasn't really a system in place for people to balance. I mean, it's not complicated, but it does require discipline and consistency. Money in, money out. But the idea that that we often will compare ourselves to what we think other people have. There's a lot of pressure out there for young people, and we got to have the house, and then we need the deck, and then we're going to, we're having difficulties in our relationship. Let's take a trip, but we don't have the money to take the trip, so we're going to we can carry it. So I love that phrase. We can carry it, so let's just do it, kind of thing. And so all of that kind of compounds, and add a cup of denial into the mix. And there you have it. And the blame and the shame that happens when people get in over their head, and it happens very slowly and very gradually. And next thing you know, they're facing a separation, and now the same income has to support 2 houses. So that's going to add even more financial pressure on people.
And we know the real estate market even though values have gone up and down, we're still significantly higher than where we were prior to COVID. And we're not going to see that change. The lack of supply, the amount of population growth. So it's harder for people as individuals to be able to own a home. So are you finding, so two questions I have. One is going to be, are you finding people that want to look at separating challenged because of the financial spectrum that we're in on the real estate market, and understanding that they're not going to be able to own homes separately? Like they may have to go into a rental suite, or they may have to stay together because and just live separate lives under the same roof because of financial issues.
Absolutely, and certainly in the context of mediation, some of those creative discussions happen, and we've seen everything from, we're going to pursue the legal separation. We are both on title for the house, but we're going to continue to live here until we decide when the right time is to make that move and to either sell or someone's going to buy someone out. And you put those provisions in the agreement. So there's everything from that to leaning on parents to co-sign, because if you have support obligations, then you've got more difficulty qualifying. And then the heartwarming, I'll never forget the time when they sold the family home. He had found a place, she had not. So even though she was still looking and the closing date was coming up, she was going to move into his new house because they had kids until she found the right place to buy.
Wow.
Your ex-spouse is going, and I looked at him and I said, like, that is just so inspiring. And he said, listen, my children are going to spend 50% of the time in my ex's house. So it's got to be the right area. It's got to be the right neighborhood. I don't want her to settle for just anything.
Let's reflect on that, Colette,
Isn't
because
that
it is, because I've helped so many people, as you know, through marital splits, and that conversation has changed, like that collaboration, maybe through so much turmoil that we're dealing with our economies, with inflation, with higher costs, that even though people made the decision to live separate lives, they're able to be more emotionally sensitive to make sure that the other partner is still being able to thrive as well as they can, also in the context of helping the overall family unit. And I think for you and I, that has always been a main goal for people. It's not to think about themselves, but to think about the children and the whole family unit still.
Exactly.
So,
and I think the word divorce and the taboo associated with that, finally, as everyone, even the ministry, encouraging people to move away from the court system, which is sort of like win-lose, and put aside the why we're separating, because that's a complicated question and marriage is complicated, and really turn your mind to the future to say, what is it that we need to do to maintain the family unit? It's going to look different, but it doesn't have to be a devastation of who's right and who's wrong and who did what to whom. And let's be really practical about it. And I think there's been a huge shift in the last decade around this notion of fault and blame when it comes to divorce. And people are looking for creative alternatives to say, we have to make this work, because if you're not okay, how is that going to affect the kids?
So it's amazing, right? In difficult times, sometimes there's this light of opportunity, right, to be able to really help people just be better versions of themselves. So I want to dive into, when you're dealing with someone that is a couple that is going through marital split, when we're talking about money and we're dealing with the concept of maybe one individual more financially savvy or knowledgeable, or maybe taking control of the finances and the other one is not. Are you spending a lot of time coaching people on an individual basis on money mindset, on being able to navigate their finances independently or with their children because they're not with the other partner? And what tools are you recommending them use to be able to help them on that journey?
Well, certainly the first step in a separation process is understanding what your net worth looks like and understanding what those numbers mean, so that when you are contemplating scenarios like the house is often the pivot asset. Should I keep the house or sell? Well, gone are the days where she gets the house, he gets the pension, and then at 80 she's got no money because you cannot eat a window. So while I'm not giving people financial advice, I'm saying, listen, here's the scenario if you keep the house and your partner keeps, the majority of the registered assets. Here's a scenario if you sell the house, downsize, and, along with that goes budgets, keep, sell, keep, rent, that sort of thing. So people have the information, because knowledge is power. and to be able to sit down with the non-financial spouse, and we do this individually. We do not have both parties sitting there at the table during a financial meeting with our mediation process. We just find that in order to customize and give the care that that person needs, we prefer to do that individually. And so while we're not saying, well, you should sell the house or you can't afford the house, sometimes I put the budget together and it's pretty obvious that
Needs to be done.
it needs to be done, but at least the decision is coming from a place of knowledge and information, not emotion.
Budgeting. Are you finding when you're getting to that point and you're dealing with the individuals separately that this is the first time they've actually put pen to paper
100%.
on their finance?
Yeah,
So
lots
when
of
you say
people.
100%, let's talk about out of 10 couples
8.
and the 2 that actually had the budget, are you finding a commonality with them in terms of not just, well, I wouldn't say profession, but maybe a mindset? Like, are you finding that it's been ingrained in them? Have you had the conversation of where that savviness on that discipline of doing a budget comes from? Or are you just, do you think it's just, they're just very meticulous in terms of where they're positioned with their money?
I think it's a little bit of both, actually.
Okay.
We do a lot of work with a concept called social styles, and social styles is it's not a personality style, but it is a model that provides clarity around how people make decisions, how they're wired. It's sort of the culmination of how they were brought up, how they deal with conflict, how they deal with difficult situations, and certainly within that social styles model, being the analytical style is one of the 4 models. People who gravitate or who have a social style of the analytical are more likely to have budget because detail and focus and accuracy is part of what drives them, and so certainly we notice that. So I think it's a little bit of both. It's how they were raised, it's their social style, it's their comfort zone, it's their attitude around money. Sometimes money can be the pressure where one party didn't want to spend at all, and the other party saying, we can afford this. Again, I come back to being able to talk about it and get on the same page.
Yeah, it's about communication, right?
Yeah.
So all the people and families that you've helped over the years, what do you think, if you can look back, what is one of the number one commonality traits that you find with couples in terms of the breakdown of a marriage? And does it have to do with money? Is there something else there?
I think it's when there are expectations that are unmet, whether it's how I think you should help me in the house or how I think our financial picture should look at this point in our life, to where I thought we would be versus where we are, and unmet expectations, and not being able to talk about it soon enough to be able to identify. You know, people say, oh, so-and-so had an affair. An affair doesn't break up. Generally speaking, there's been years and years leading up to the disconnect between the couple.
And what I'm hearing is that it's about communication on every aspect.
We don't have to agree on everything. I've got this great model that sometimes I use. I think in my next chapter, I'm going to actually do relationship coaching, because you don't go through 600 divorces and not think, oh, there's some common threads here.
Yeah.
But I have this image of a Venn diagram, and I call it the me and the we bucket. And I think before you get a marriage license, you should have to take a course on understanding how to talk about what's in my me bucket and what's in our we bucket. We have to be aligned on that, whether it's kids or discipline or how we're going to raise kids or travel or savings, or everybody needs their me zone for sure. What's important to me doesn't have to be, not about agreeing on everything, but it's about putting it on the table and being able to identify it.
I just love what you said, the me and we bucket.
Yeah.
I love that.
Because so many times in a marriage, I'm going to try to bring you into, I'm going to try to convince you that my perspective on blank, kids, discipline, housekeeping, money, is the right way. Because I can't, if this is what I believe, then I must be right, and I can't have space for 2 different truths to exist. So I'm going to try, so a lot of conflict is around, I got to convince you that this is my way is the right way. And people spend an awful lot of energy around that, and that's that tug of war. But being able to acknowledge that, you know what, maybe that's the thing that's going to go in my me bucket because we're not necessarily on the same page, but then contain it within what's going to make sense. Huge.
And you just said, like, right before you get into that relationship step where you're moving into marriage or moving into a common law relationship with purchasing a home, the me and we, like, it's such an aha for me because I'm sitting there thinking, this would be great. You could do it on every topic.
Absolutely.
And money being a massive one, right? Yeah. Talking about money, what is your me and what is the we now? What does that look like? And being able to work through, I think if you've got items that are in your me bucket, what needs to actually shift to the we to make it successful and setting up that communication. So yeah, I understand what you said, like doing that course, like for you, because you deal with this so much, and so have I without so many clients, that I found that communication time and time again about money, and how I've had one spouse or the other spouse say, I need to have a separate conversation and not both of us in the room, yet they're buying their second home. Well, there's a marital breakdown there. There's something happening there. And I want to dive into when people do have money problems, because I'm always of the mindset too, I never judge people from their bank account. And I think that unfortunately society has done a very bad job on judging people on money when there's very savvy and successful people that just have grown up or have had trauma happen and that has impacted their financing or life has impacted it. We've seen it over COVID and it can derail people. So I think that I'd love to hear your opinion on that concept of judgment on money. Like, where do you find that people are so judgmental if it comes in a conversation where the other spouse does find, like you said, they know about the line of credit? Are you finding that the other partner is being so judgmental and it's causing that separation because of it? Or do they end up in this situation that we're in now economically where we have to work together as a unit now, as a family, so that we can still thrive? People are being more accommodating and forgiving with it.
Well, I would say it would be a mix.
Okay.
Certainly the why, particularly if there's a lot of debt, like where did that come from?
Yeah.
So certainly if it's a result of addiction, whether it's a gambling addiction or alcohol or, the disappointment. I think what is behind any kind of judgment or anger is really disappointment.
Yeah.
Disappointment that we got to this place.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as you said, life is busy and hectic and complicated, and you can't turn it off anymore. It's 24/7 technology, and people just haven't got the reserve. And so there's a lot of reactive behavior out there, whether it's reactive spending to soothe for just a moment.
Exactly, in the moment.
Too tired to cook, I'm just going to order because I can click a button and dinner will be here, and then, whatever that is. I think it's a lot more, I don't want to date us, but it is a lot more complicated than when we were younger. And
I think it's hard for people, especially a lot of the younger generation, when they see older people say, well, in our time, we made sure we budgeted. We didn't go out to dinners every week. It was more of a monthly, like we really organized it. But I mean, I don't want to date myself, but obviously, I've been around for a couple of years here to know that I think that life got very expensive and we didn't keep up with inflation in terms of our income. So we have to adjust our budgets, and we haven't done that as a society because we haven't been taught the fundamentals of how to be able to break that down. What tools do you provide people or support in terms of, one, managing their budget? Two, do you recommend platforms or podcasts or training for financial literacy and being able to work through being a better in terms of their everyday financing practices? And also, do you find that it starts with realistically a money shift, right, in terms of that money mindset?
I think that oftentimes when people are facing separation, it's a little bit of a rock bottom. There's an evaluation of, what I thought was really important. When you take away what I thought was my primary relationship, some of those other things just don't matter as much. So for some people, we have seen a pretty significant shift in, I recently heard someone say, I'm looking forward to finally having money for the things that I want to do instead of just always bills, because their partner was more the spender and they wanted to be the saver, but they also wanted to please. And so the relationship took precedent over saving. So while I don't have a specific platform per se, I think people just naturally, when they're facing such a major life-changing event, for many, one of two things will happen. They will either reevaluate some of those core things of what is truly going to make them happy, and it is an inside job. That's what it is. Or they'll rinse and repeat and conveniently say, well, my partner ... And so now I have a new partner, and statistically 60% of second marriages end in divorce. 60. 60. So really being able to do the work as to what was my contribution to the the breakdown of my relationship, not from a place of blame, but just from a place of learning and understanding about myself.
Exactly.
And so that I don't set myself up for that second, because it is more complicated when you have stepchildren and exes, and
it does get more complicated.
Yeah.
And I think there's got to be a level of forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
I always say that. I mean, I think that, it's not failures, it's lessons learned.
Absolutely.
Right? To move to the next. And I think it's where we've got to be more sensitive and more compassionate when people are dealing with not only a separation of a marriage, but especially on the financial side.
Absolutely.
Because we are not in a world where we have been taught the fundamental foundations to be able to thrive in different, not only economic conditions, but also different life conditions.
Yeah.
Are you finding that when you're dealing with the people that have been savvy with their financing, are you finding that they have that reserve of money aside for these economic life changes, or just life changes in general? And what does that look like? Is it a 6 month? Is it a 12 month? Has there been a magic number that you found that really works for couples or individuals?
I've certainly seen 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Probably sitting in a TFSA, which may not have been necessarily designed as an emergency fund, but it's there.
But it's there, yeah.
Generally drive older cars. Not a lot of car loans out there.
Yeah.
Again, the value around them, it's not to say that cars aren't necessary, but again, that fail to plan to fail.
Yeah,
I know my car is getting older, so I need to start saving so that when the time comes,
you can get it.
I'm ready to purchase again, or lease, or whatever. So I think that they usually have some kind of system, whatever that looks like. I love the cookie jar one, where this young couple had finished post-secondary and they were kind of getting on with their careers, but realized they wanted to go in a different direction. Very amicable. But their system in university was, at the beginning of the month, they would put $400 in a jar. And yes, this was a few years ago. And that was the grocery money, because they were both living on student loans and grants. And at the end of the month, if there was money in the jar left, they would buy a bottle of wine, and that would be their Friday night event. And if there was no money, then they didn't buy a bottle of wine. And I thought, it's not about which system, it's about having a system. But They had the conversation. They had the conversation, and they had a system.
I love what you said. It's not about what system, just have a system.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so many tools out there now, so many educational platforms on money, how to save, what platforms you need, what budget, and people become overwhelmed, so they're paralyzed and they don't even start one. But you just need to start a system, and it could be very simple.
It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be on a sheet of paper. And I also love the strategy of, before you buy something, I also coach people, before you send the text message to your ex, think about, is this going to be necessary to do? And will this be helpful? So from a financial perspective, is this a need to have or a nice to have? And if it falls in the nice to have category, maybe take a pause and think about, is this something that I need to have today, or is this something that I want, need versus want?
Or it's the 24-hour rule. So I tell a lot of people over the years, where I can see when we're looking at bank statements, because we have to confirm down payment on purchases, I can tell where people are at just in a 30-day bank statement, because I can see what's coming in and out and where there might be some trauma or issues lie. So I always tell people, one of the tools is, if you are one that is avidly shopping online, let's just say, I'll use Lululemon, because so many people buy stuff on Lululemon. You actually put it in the shopping cart. So if you're doing that and you're
Amazon
looking at
cart,
Amazon, whatever it is, and then you save and you re-look at that in like 2 days, or 24 hours, and then you see where you're at. Do you really need it? Or is it a want?
And I think it's harder today, and again, I don't want to date myself, but for us, historically, if you wanted something, you had to get in the car, drive to the mall, go buy it. So you really had to want something to go to all that trouble. Today, it's so easy and so convenient.
It's a click of a button.
So, right?
Yeah, it's a click of a button.
That makes it, I think, even harder for folks to manage through that.
So Colette, best and worst advice that you have received, or you think, let's just talk about people in general when they've talked to you.
Well, we can carry the payments. So let's buy the $50,000, $70,000 vehicle. I can carry the payments.
Buy now, pay later.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Mentality. Yeah.
And the best advice, fail to plan to fail. Have a contingency because you just don't know. How many people were laid off during COVID, never saw it coming.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning with no emergency fund.
And no emergency fund for other life issues, right? Like even when we look at in Canada from the medical side, right? It's very hard now to get medical treatment quickly if you need it, to have that emergency fund in case you have to go overseas. I'm seeing that time and time again. So there's so many ways that having money, and let's talk about financial freedom. Right? Like
at the end of the day, we all want to be happy. And everything, whether it's, I would love to look like this, I wish my body was like this, I wish my partner, I wish I would, all of it, the fundamental core human desire is for happy.
Yeah.
To be joyful, to be happy, to have peace. And so much of that doesn't necessarily come from money. In fact, a lot of it doesn't.
And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I have seen and learned over the years, that money really truly isn't the essence of happiness. You have to create your own happiness, but it starts with the inner core of yourself, right? And I think that money is one aspect of your healing journey. No matter what people go through, a very big lesson about money. Even if the ultimately very wealthy, how many people have you listened to or heard their stories of them being financially broken and then being able to reinvent themselves and be ultimately very financially wealthy, but really learn some lessons and stay humble during it, right? I always, like, we've had so much to talk about, and we could continue on, and I'll have you back on it for sure. But I always end with a couple of things. One is our previous guest gives us a question. It's a mystery question for you to answer. So don't worry, it's not complicated. But the question is, if you could look back, this is for you personally, because I think stories for ourselves personally will help someone that's listening today. If you could look back personally for yourself in your younger years, what would you have said to yourself about money, knowing what you know today?
Make sure I have a credit card in my own name. Make sure, and it's hard to believe that in my first marriage, as I was busy raising kids and teaching, I just deferred so much of that. Even though I ran the budget and I knew the budget, when I separated from my ex-husband 21 years ago, or ish, maybe more, 24 years ago, I did not realize, although I was on the mortgage, I didn't have a credit card in my name. And the first thing the woman at the bank did said, okay, we're getting a credit card and a line of credit just in your name. I had no idea that the credit report was pretty blank because it just wasn't something that we ever needed to talk about or talked about. So I would say don't depend on what you can't control.
Mm-hmm. And think about this, like you just reminded me of like when credit cards were allowed for women in Canada to have or even be on mortgages was not until the 1970s. Like it's not that long ago. Yeah. In fact, it came into place when I just was born. And when I reflect, I'm like, that's not that long ago that women had rights about having credit or being able to have home ownership. And we've definitely made strides, but through those strides, I don't think there has been enough education. So I love what you said, because that's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Make
definitely
sure.
a big one.
Sometimes people think, well, we have a joint credit card. There is a primary card holder, and the secondary card holder, it's not insignificant, but it doesn't show up. So
Yeah.
have one independently in your own name so that you start to build your own financial independence.
Do you have a favorite quote?
I do. I love Brené Brown, and I love her message about the inner work. So authenticity is the practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be, and embrace who we really are.
I love that. Yeah. So Colette, for all the listeners that have been very blessed to listen to you on today's podcast, how do they get a hold of you if they are looking at contemplating separating with their partner, or what that would look like for them?
Well, we have an awesome team of mediators in our office, and we're at 25 Yonge Street in Waterloo, but they can find us on fairwaydivorce.com and then just search the Waterloo location, and Michael will happily walk them through sort of what those first steps are. We know it's overwhelming for people. They don't know where to turn, and let's face it, there are so many advice givers, I call them the peanut gallery, about what you should do and you should do this and that. Just call and Mike will start to break that down for you and start that conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Colette. You know how much you mean to me. And I know over the years you've helped so many of our clients with a lot of education, support, tools, and strategies to help them, restart life again in a really good direction with their family and support. So, and I know you've done a lot for this community. So thank you for your time. We'll definitely have you on again, because I know we only kind of hit the top part of what needs to be discussed on this matter, but you've got so much knowledge. So I appreciate your time, and I hope everyone listening today found this information very insightful and valuable. Connecting with you as our listeners is so important to me, to make sure that we're addressing any concerns, any questions you have to navigate these times and get you on a path of financial success. That is a huge priority for me. So make sure that you do subscribe to my channel and follow us and connect with us on social media at Tracy Valko. Until next time, take care. I look forward to bringing you another valuable content on our next Beyond the Mortgage episode. And remember, you got this.